There is a moment in eXistenZ where Ted Pikul raises a gun and pulls the trigger. He didn't decide to do it. He knows he didn't decide to do it. The action came from somewhere inside him that he doesn't recognize as himself, a layer of behavior that the game installed without asking permission. And when the trigger is pulled and someone is dead, the question that paralyzes him is not, was that real? It's something older and more disturbing. Who did that? That's the territory this essay is going to inhabit. Not the question of reality versus illusion. That's the question everyone asks about eXistenZ, and it's the right question. But it's not the only one. The question of identity is older, harder, and in some ways more immediately terrifying. Because the possibility that the world around you isn't real is an abstract philosophical problem. The possibility that you are not the author of your own actions is something you can feel happening in real time. Cronenberg understood this, and in 1999, he made a film that takes it completely seriously. eXistenZ is not a film about virtual reality. It's not a cautionary tale about video game addiction. It's not even primarily a film about the nature of reality, though it is that too. At its core, eXistenZ is a film about what happens to the self when behavior is scripted by a system the self didn't choose and can't fully see, about what remains of identity when the actions that express it are determined from outside, about whether there is a meaningful difference between choosing to do something and being the kind of person who, placed in the right circumstances, will do it. These are not new questions. They are some of the oldest questions in philosophy, and Cronenberg puts them inside a body horror film set in a world of organic game devices and spinal ports. Because he understands something that academic philosophy often forgets. These questions are not abstract. They happen in the body. They feel like something. And the feeling is not comfortable. To understand what Pikul loses over the course of eXistenZ and what his loss reveals, you need to understand what he starts with. Pikul begins the film as the only character who hasn't already surrendered. While everyone around him has a bioport, a surgically installed opening at the base of the spine, through which organic game devices connect directly to the nervous system, Pikul has refused. His refusal isn't principled in a philosophical sense. It's visceral, instinctive, almost animal. He doesn't want something opened in his body. He doesn't want his nervous system connected to an external system he doesn't control. The resistance precedes any articulated reason for it. This is important. Cronenberg doesn't present Pikul's resistance as ignorance to be overcome or as irrational fear to be laughed at. He presents it as the last honest response available, the body registering, before the mind can rationalize, that something about this is wrong, that surrendering the boundary between self and system is not a neutral technical upgrade, that it changes something that matters. The surgery happens anyway. Gas, a character played by Willem Dafoe in a gas station that looks more like a body horror set piece than a place of commerce, installs the bioport, and from that moment, Pikul is open. Literally, a port in his spine, through which the game can enter. What enters is not just experience. What enters is behavior. This is the distinction that eXistenZ makes with unusual philosophical precision. When Pikul is inside the game, he doesn't just perceive a different reality, he acts differently. He says things he didn't intend to say. He follows conversational scripts that feel foreign to him, even as they come out of his mouth. He kills with a weapon made from human bones and teeth, fabricated at a table in a game restaurant from the skeletal remains of mutant reptiles, and the killing doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like the execution of a predetermined sequence that his body carried out while he watched from somewhere slightly behind his own eyes. The philosophical tradition has a name for what Pikul is experiencing: heteronomy. Kant introduced the concept in opposition to autonomy, self-legislation, the capacity to act according to principles you have given yourself. Heteronomy is the condition of acting according to principles imposed from outside, by desire, by social pressure, by biological drives, by any force that is not the rational self, freely choosing its own law. For Kant, heteronomy is the condition that makes genuine moral action impossible. You can't be praised or blamed for what you do if what you do is determined by something other than your rational will. Pikul Inside the Game is a study in heteronomy made visceral. The game has a script. Characters follow the script, because if they don't, the game stalls. It traps them, refuses to advance, holds the narrative hostage until the required behavior is performed. Pikul resists this when he first encounters it. He tries to say something other than what the game wants him to say. The attempt fails. The words that come out are the game's words, not his. And Allegra, Jennifer Jason Leigh, explains this to him with a casualness that is more disturbing than any explicit horror in the film. The game requires certain behaviors, and his character will produce those behaviors, and the distinction between what his character does and what he does is something he'll need to stop worrying about. This is the moment where eXistenZ goes somewhere most films about identity don't dare to go, because Allegra's explanation is not villainous, it's practical, and it points toward a question that the film refuses to resolve. Is the distinction Pikul is trying to preserve actually meaningful? Consider what the game is doing. It takes Pikul's nervous system, the same substrate that produces all his genuine experiences, all his authentic emotions, all his real decisions, and runs different inputs through it. The outputs are different behaviors, but the system producing those behaviors is the same system that produces his behavior outside the game. The game didn't install a foreign agent inside Pikul. It used Pikul, the actual physical Pikul, with his actual nervous system, to generate actions that Pikul wouldn't have chosen. The question this raises is not, was Pikul really there? He was. His body performed the actions. His nervous system processed the experience. The question is whether Pikul, the self that claims authorship of Pikul's actions, was there in any meaningful sense. John Locke argued that personal identity consists in continuity of consciousness, specifically in memory. You are the same person who did something yesterday because you remember doing it. The self is constituted by the thread of memory connecting present experience to past action. This sounds reassuring until you apply it to Pikul's situation. Pikul remembers what his character did in the game. He carries those memories out with him when he leaves. By Locke's account, he is therefore the same person who did those things. The game Pikul and the real Pikul are not two separate persons, but one continuous self with a particularly unusual set of memories. This is precisely what disturbs him. David Hume went further. He argued that the self is not a thing at all, not a substance, not an entity, not something that persists through time. It's a bundle of perceptions, a sequence of experiences that generates the illusion of continuity. There is no author behind the actions. There is only the sequence of actions itself, which the mind retrospectively narrativizes into the story of a self. If Hume is right, then Pikul's distress about who performed the game's actions is based on a fiction. There was no authentic Pikul whose authorship was violated. There was only a sequence of behaviors, some of which the narrative of selfhood will claim, and some of which it will try to disown. The game makes this visible in a way that ordinary life conceals, because ordinary life also involves heteronomy, the behaviors that feel most authentically yours, the things you do without thinking, the reactions that seem to come from the core of who you are produced by the same nervous system that the game hijacks. They were installed by genetics, by childhood, by culture, by every system that shaped you before you were capable of choosing. The game is unusual not because it scripts behavior from outside. Everything scripts behavior from outside, but because it does so visibly, in real time, in a way that makes the scripting impossible to ignore. Pikul ignores it as long as he can, and then he pauses the game, returns to what should be reality, and finds that the distinction he was trying to preserve has collapsed, not because reality has become indistinguishable from the game, but because he has become indistinguishable from his character. The behaviors the game installed don't disappear when the game pauses. The person who pulled the trigger is still there, still him, still carrying the memory of what he did, and unable to locate the boundary between what was scripted and what was chosen. The final revelation of eXistenZ, that the reality the film presented as base reality was itself another game called eXistenZ, completes this logic with a cruelty that is almost elegant. Allegra and Pikul, returning from the game they believed they were playing, commit real murders in what they believe is the real world. The ease with which they do it, the absence of hesitation, the almost cheerful efficiency is not presented as evidence of corruption. It's presented as the logical consequence of a self that has lost track of its own authorship. They kill because the game taught them that killing is something they do. And once the game has demonstrated that, the demonstration doesn't require the game to persist. This is what the film's final question, are we still in the game, is really asking. Not whether the physical environment is simulated, whether the selves performing actions in that environment are still operating under scripts they didn't choose, whether the authorship they claim for their actions is real or retrospective narrative, whether there is a difference. Cronenberg doesn't answer. The camera cuts, but the question it leaves behind is not about eXistenZ. It's about the same thing Kant was asking when he wrote about autonomy and heteronomy. It's about what you are when you act, whether there is a you that acts, or only a system that produces behavior and calls it a self. Pikul started the film with a bioport-shaped hole in his certainty about this. He ended it unable to remember what the certainty felt like. The cocinero Chinese asks the question. Allegra and Pikul hesitate, and somewhere behind your own eyes, watching this, something hesitates too.